If you'd told me 2 years ago that I would be sitting in a courtroom while my own children argued over whether I was capable of managing my own life, I would have laughed, maybe cried a little, then laughed again. Because the thing about being 71 years old and quiet and careful with your words is that people stop seeing you as someone who thinks. They just see an old woman who needs to be handled. That's what my son thought. That's what his wife thought. And for a long time, I let them think it. My name doesn't matter as much as the story does, but for the sake of telling it right, you can call me what my colleagues used to call me, and what a judge would eventually call me, out loud in front of everyone who had underestimated me. I'll get to that part. First, let me tell you how it started, because it didn't start in a courtroom. It started at my own kitchen table, over sweet potato pie and a conversation I was never supposed to hear. It was the Sunday after Thanksgiving. My son, I'll call him my older boy because he hates being called a boy, and right now I don't particularly care what he likes, had come down from Charlotte with his wife Renee. My daughter-in-law's the kind of woman who smiles with her whole face while she's deciding how to use you. I had never said that out loud before, not to anyone. I had filed it away the way you file away things that are true but that you hope will never become relevant. My younger daughter was there too with her husband. She's gentler than her brother, but gentle people can still be led, and that Thanksgiving, she was being led. I had stepped outside to get some air. It was cold, even for November in Raleigh, and I stood on my back porch for longer than I intended, just listening to the quiet. When I came back to the door, I heard them. My older boy was talking about a facility, not a nursing home, he said. He was very careful about that word. A managed community. He said it like it was something desirable, like a resort with handrails. He said I'd been forgetting things. He said I'd left the stove on twice. He said he was worried. What he did not say was that my house, the house I have owned outright since 1987, the house I raised 3 children in, the house that sits on a corner lot in a neighborhood that developers have been circling for the past 4 years, was worth considerably more than it had been when I bought it. I stood at that door for a long time. Long enough to hear Renee say that they should talk to a lawyer before the holidays were over. Long enough to hear my daughter say, very quietly, I don't know. She seems fine to me. Long enough to hear my older boy say, that's the thing, she seems fine, but you can't always tell. I went back to the porch, I sat down in the cold, and I made a decision right then that I would not let any of them see what I had just heard, or what I was thinking, or what I was going to do about it. That was the beginning. I want to tell you something about silence because I think people misunderstand it. Silence is not the same as having nothing to say. It is not the same as not knowing. Silence, when you choose it deliberately, is one of the most powerful tools a person can hold on to. I had spent 31 years as a forensic accountant. 31 years of sitting across tables from people who thought they were smarter than me, who thought I hadn't found what I had already found, who thought their smiles and their confidence and their expensive lawyers would change what the numbers said. I had learned over 3 decades that the person who speaks first and loudest is almost never the one who wins. So I went back inside. I served the pie. I asked my older boy about his job, and I asked Renee about her mother's health, and I asked my daughter if she and her husband were still thinking about buying a bigger place. I was warm. I was present. And I was watching every single one of them with the same quiet attention I had once used to unravel embezzlement schemes worth 7 figures. After they left, I sat at my kitchen table for 2 hours. I wrote down everything I had heard, word for word, with the time and the date. Then I opened my laptop and I started making calls. The first call I made was to an estate attorney named Howard, not a friend, a professional contact from years ago who I had always trusted precisely because he was not warm. Howard was the kind of man who billed by the 6-minute increment and answered questions with other questions. I left a message. He called me back the next morning. Tell me what you're dealing with, he said. I told him. All of it. The conversation I'd overheard, the stove, which, for the record, I had left on once, not twice, and it had not been lit. Just the clock blinking from a power outage, and the way my son had been asking questions lately about whether I had a will, and whether it was current. and whether I'd thought about simplifying my finances. Howard was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Have you documented your mental competency recently?" I hadn't. I told him so. "Do it," he said. "Today if you can. Go to your doctor, ask for a full cognitive evaluation. Get it in writing. And then, let's talk about your estate documents." I had a will. I had had one for years. But I had not updated it since my husband passed, and there were things in it that were, as Howard put it, open to interpretation. We spent the next 3 weeks quietly closing every open door. My older boy called twice during that time. Both times he was casual. How was I feeling? Had I thought any more about maybe downsizing? He knew a guy who did senior living consultations. No pressure, just informational. I told him I was fine. I told him I'd think about it. I was warm. I was present. And I was, at that exact moment, sitting in Howard's office signing documents that would make everything my son was planning completely irrelevant. It was February when things escalated. My older boy showed up at my house on a Tuesday afternoon without calling. That alone told me something because he had always been a man who scheduled things. He had Renee with him, and he had a man I didn't recognize, a pleasant-looking man in a gray suit who introduced himself as a care coordinator, said he worked with families navigating difficult transitions. I invited them in. I made coffee. I sat at my kitchen table across from this care coordinator and I listened to him talk about cognitive decline and quality of life and the peace of mind that came from having support structures in place. He had a brochure. The facility was in Cary. It had a garden. When he finished, I looked at my older boy. I said, "Did you bring him here to convince me of something or to assess me?" My son said, "Mom," I said, "because if this is an assessment, I should tell you that I passed a full neuropsychological evaluation 6 weeks ago. My doctor has it on file. My attorney has a copy." The care coordinator looked at my son. My son looked at Renee. Renee looked at her coffee cup. I said, "I appreciate you coming. I know this comes from a place of love, but I'd like you to call before you visit next time. All of you." After they left, I poured the rest of the coffee down the drain and I stood at my kitchen sink and I gave myself exactly 5 minutes to feel everything I was feeling, the hurt, the anger, the grief of realizing that your own child has looked at you and seen a problem to be managed rather than a person to be respected. 5 minutes. Then I washed the cups, dried my hands, and called Howard. "They brought a care coordinator," I said. He was quiet for just a moment. Then he said, "All right, let's start the next phase. I need to tell you something about my professional history because it matters to what happened next." After I retired, I hadn't exactly stopped working. I had spent the last 4 years as an unpaid consultant for a nonprofit organization that assists elderly individuals who are victims of financial exploitation and guardianship abuse. It's a smaller world than you'd think, and a more common problem than most people want to know about. I had seen dozens of cases, adult children petitioning for guardianship over parents who were perfectly capable, families liquidating assets under the cover of managing an elderly relative's affairs, properties sold at well below market value to buyers with convenient connections. I had testified in 3 cases. I had written 2 papers, both published in journals that my son had certainly never read. I want to be clear, I am not telling you this to make myself sound impressive. I am telling you this because it is the only reason what happened in that courtroom had the ending it did. By April, my older boy had retained a lawyer. I found out through Howard, who had received a letter informing him that my son was exploring a petition for limited conservatorship, not full guardianship. His lawyer was careful to say, just a limited oversight of my financial affairs. The letter cited the stove incident. It cited a time I had supposedly gotten confused at a pharmacy. It cited a conversation with a neighbor who had mentioned to my son that I had seemed a little forgetful lately. I read that letter 3 times. Then I called Howard and I said, "I want to respond." He said, "I know, but I want you to think about how." That is when he told me his plan. And his plan, I will admit, required more patience than I thought I had left. The hearing was set for the 2nd week of June. In the weeks leading up to it, my son called regularly. He was kind. He said he was doing this because he loved me. He said he just wanted to make sure I was taken care of. He mentioned the house, offhand, casually, the way you mention something you've been thinking about for months, and said that maybe after everything's settled, it might make sense to think about putting it in a trust. For simplicity, I said, "That's worth considering?" I said nothing else. I want to tell you what it feels like to watch someone you raised, someone you sat up with, through fevers and bad dreams and the particular misery of high school, look at you and see only an asset. It doesn't feel the way you think it would. It doesn't feel like rage, at least not at first. It feels like something quieter than that, like a door closing, like the very specific sadness of realizing that a person you loved completely has been replaced at some point by someone you don't entirely recognize. I had that feeling every time my son called in those weeks. I filed it away the way I had learned to file things. The morning of the hearing, I dressed carefully. I wore the navy suit I had worn to give testimony in a guardianship case in Mecklenburg County 3 years earlier. I wore my reading glasses on a chain because I knew I would need them. I brought a folder with my cognitive evaluation, my updated estate documents, a letter from my physician, and 14 pages of financial records going back 7 years, all organized by date. My son was already there when I arrived. He was with his lawyer, a young man who looked confident in the way that people look confident before they understand what they're dealing with. Renee was there. My daughter was there too, sitting a few seats away from her brother, and when she saw me, she looked like she was going to cry. I gave her a small nod. I did not smile, but I wanted her to know that what was about to happen was not about her. Howard was beside me. He was calm in the way that deeply prepared people are calm. The judge came in. She was a woman, maybe 60, with close-cropped gray hair and the kind of face that told you she had heard every version of every story and was not interested in the version that had been polished for the courtroom. My son's lawyer went first. He laid out the petition carefully, the stove incident, the pharmacy, the neighbor's statement, the family's concern. He said the word safety 8 times. I counted. Then Howard stood up. He said, "Your Honor, I'd like to begin by submitting several documents into the record." He listed them: the cognitive evaluation, the physician's letter, the updated estate plan, and this was the part he had asked me to trust him on, a document I had not seen until that morning, a letter from the nonprofit organization I had worked with, written by their executive director, outlining my professional role, my areas of expertise, and the specific nature of the cases I had assisted with. The judge looked at the letter. She looked up. She said, "Is this the Miriam Caldwell?" Howard said, "Yes, Your Honor. And I want to tell you what it felt like to hear my name said like that. Not my son's mother. Not the woman with the house on the corner. Miriam Caldwell, the name attached to 31 years of work, to published research, to courtroom testimony, to the specific and hard-won expertise that my family had never once asked me about." My son's lawyer shifted in his seat. The judge looked at my son over her reading glasses. She said, "Your mother spent nearly 3 decades investigating financial exploitation of elderly individuals and has consulted on guardianship abuse cases in this state. You brought a petition questioning her ability to manage her own finances." She let that sit in the air for a moment. "Counselor, I'm going to need you to show me something considerably more substantial than a stove and a neighbor's impression." He could not. The petition was denied, all of it. Howard had also prepared a counter-motion, and by the end of that hearing there was a formal record noting the nature of the petition and the circumstances under which it had been filed. A record that would matter if anything like this was ever attempted again. My son did not look at me when it was over. He walked out with his lawyer, and Renee followed, and I watched them go. I did not feel triumphant. I want to be honest with you about that. I felt tired. I felt something that was not quite relief and not quite sadness, but lived somewhere in between, the feeling of having been right about something you desperately wished you'd been wrong about. My daughter touched my arm. She said, "Mom, I'm so sorry." I should have. I said, "I know, and I meant it. Come have dinner with me this week." She did. And we talked for 4 hours, and she told me things she had been afraid to say, and I told her things I had been carrying alone. And somewhere in the middle of that dinner, I felt the door that had started to close come back open. Just a little. My older boy and I have not spoken since the hearing. I don't know yet whether that door will open again. I think about it. I think about that little boy with the fevers, and I think about the man who hired a lawyer to question my mind, and I try to hold both of those things at the same time without letting either one of them be the whole truth. It's hard work. I do it anyway. What I want you to take from this is not the courtroom moment, as satisfying as it was. What I want you to take is what happened before it. The weeks of quiet preparation, the decision to say nothing when saying nothing, was the harder choice. The understanding that the most dangerous thing I could have done was to let them see how much I knew. People will underestimate you. Some of them will do it out of carelessness, and some of them will do it out of arrogance, and some of them, and this is the one that stays with you, will do it out of need. Because believing you are less makes what they want from you feel more justifiable. You do not have to perform your strength for people who are hoping you don't have any. You just have to have it. And you have to know exactly when to use it. I am 71 years old. I live in the house I have owned since 1987. I have a new alarm on the stove, not because I need it, but because it gives me peace of mind, and I like peace of mind. I still consult for the nonprofit. I still get on the phone with families who are watching what I watched, who are sitting at kitchen tables filing away things that are true and hoping they will never become relevant. I tell all of them the same thing Howard told me back when this started. Document everything. Update your documents. And whatever you do, don't let them see you move. The judge called me by my name that morning. Just my name, the one I earned. And in that quiet, wood-paneled room, with my son's lawyer looking at the floor and the petition falling apart, and 31 years of work sitting in a folder on the table, that was enough. That was more than enough. I've been thinking about what actually caused everything that happened, not just the courtroom, but all of it. Going back to that Thanksgiving door, my son didn't wake up one morning and decide to be cruel. That's not how it works. What happened was slower than that, and in some ways more painful. He looked at me over a period of years, and he saw someone who had gotten quieter. Someone who no longer went to an office, someone whose world had visibly shrunk in the way that retirement shrinks things. And he made an assumption. He assumed that the quiet meant empty. He assumed that because I wasn't performing my competence for him, I didn't have any. Every time he called and I didn't mention my consulting work, every time I deflected a question about my finances with a simple, "I'm fine," every time I chose not to explain myself, I was, without realizing it, allowing a version of me to form in his mind that had very little to do with who I actually was. That is not an excuse for what he did. I want to be clear about that. What he did was wrong, and it caused real harm, and the fact that I understand how it started doesn't make it acceptable. But I think it's worth being honest about the part I played, not in deserving it, because no one deserves to have their autonomy questioned by their own child, but in allowing the conditions for it. There's something I've carried from all of this about what it means to be known. I spent 31 years building a professional identity that I then quietly packed away when I retired. I stopped talking about my work. I stopped mentioning my cases. I made myself smaller in social situations because I thought that's what you were supposed to do. Step back, let the younger people lead, stop taking up so much room. And the cost of that I didn't see coming. The cost was that the people closest to me stopped knowing me. Not all of me. Just the parts that would have made what my son tried to do impossible to even imagine. I'm not saying that a woman's worth is in her credentials. That is exactly the opposite of what I'm saying. I'm saying that when you go silent about the things that make you whole, your work, your knowledge, your history, you leave a blank space, and sometimes the people around you will fill that space with whatever serves them. That's not wisdom. That's just a thing that happens, and it is worth knowing. What Renee and my son built their plan on was a version of me that was 2 dimensions instead of 3. The woman at the kitchen table serving pie, the woman who maybe left the stove on once, the woman who didn't push back. They never thought to ask what I'd been doing for the past 4 years, what cases I'd sat with, what families I'd helped, what I knew about exactly the kind of thing they were attempting. They didn't ask because they had already decided, and the decision they had made required me to be less than I was. Howard always says that the most important document in any case is the one the other side doesn't know exists. I think about that a lot now. I think every person carries something like that, a version of themselves, a history, a depth of experience, that other people simply haven't thought to look for. The question is whether you know it's there, whether you respect it enough to protect it, whether, when the moment comes, you are ready to let it speak. I was ready. That is the only reason the story ended the way it did. Not luck, not timing. Preparation and the decision, made on a cold back porch on a November night, to trust what I knew over what they needed me to believe about myself. That decision is available to anyone,